Welcome back everyone to the final installment of the community rated character tier list. This one covers books 11 through 15. Just like last time, we'll be giving all of the Arc 3 characters their ranks on this fresh list and then comparing them to Arcs 1 and 2 at the end of the video. Now it's time for the finale. Let's kick it off with one of the oldest characters in the series, Jerboa III, coming in at over 2,000 years old. Her life is pretty sad, but she conducts herself with dignity and respect despite it all. She gets A tier, and the reason for her sadness is mostly Jerboa. She started off fine, but as the years wore on, her morality slipped further and further away from her. In the end, she's a manipulative, abusive, and vengeful mother. Surprisingly though, she got C tier, which is not terrible. Now, Scarab is more of an old lady I can get behind. She stands up to the Queen of the High Wings, treats the Silkwings with respect, and generally works to help others in need. All around good qualities, even if she is a bit abrasive at times. A staple of A tier. Swordtail! I love Swordtail. In books 11 through 14, I was not a fan. He seemed way too headstrong, but then I read book 15, and he became one of my favorite characters of the arc. He just has such a natural chemistry with Luna, and even if he is annoyingly impulsive and stubborn at times, his sense of justice and willingness to do what he thinks is right just convinced me he is great, and he moved high up into A tier since the last one. Then there's Wasp, who was built up as the primary villain of Arc 3 in the first couple books, but then pivoted to being the secondary villain behind the Breath of Evil. She ended up in C tier, which I am shook. She had great potential, some big payoffs in the finale, but then she was just kind of like sidelined in book 15, which was really sad, but I guess that is where the plot went, so what can you do? Alright, Belladonna, an interesting character to me. She's one of those ones that gets introduced as a bad guy and then becomes less of a villain but sort of stays in that gray area until the latter parts of the final book. Mostly her issue is that she's very much on the warpath and kind of a control freak. She's not a great mom to Sundew, and that, I think, is what lands her in low C tier. And Hemlock is pretty much just the same, except he gets even less page time. But when you're a bad character, maybe that's a good thing. He gets slightly higher than Belladonna. On the subject of questionable parents, we have Admiral, Blue's dad. I did not like him as a character, but I loved him as a plot device. He is the embodiment of everything Blue has to overcome, the extreme passivity and non-confrontationalism. When they meet for a brief time, Blue is confronted with this. He is forced to contend with all of the things about himself that have been causing him problems the entire book, and when Blue physically leaves behind his father to escape, he's also metaphorically leaving behind those aspects of who he was. I thought it was a really fun and interesting way to get that character development, but yeah, Admiral as a character was terrible. He got D tier. Then there's Katydid, Cricket's older sister who turned out to actually be her mom. That was a surprise, but she was pretty cool when she was around. She just wasn't around that much, so B+, very top. And Cadell, Cricket's mother, who actually turned out to be her grandmother, she's just awful to Cricket and to Katydid and to, well, really anyone unfortunate enough to run into her. Where Wasp was evil on a general level, Cadell is evil on a personal level, and that lands her in D tier. But back to HiFi royalty, we have almost certainly the best among them, Jewel. She has that kind of no-nonsense, we're going to do what we need to do to get things done attitude, and I really like that about her. She got into low A tier. And next up is Willow, one half of the most popular ship in the series, at least according to the 2,000 or so people surveyed in the ship tier list, and I think all of that love carries over here because Willow takes a spot in S tier. She gets almost no development in the books, but I also think she kind of just doesn't need any. She's not a primary character, she's there mostly to help Sundew develop in her own story, to build some of the themes of the world, and to add tension to the plot, and she does all of those things perfectly. Plus, she totally clutches up and kills Hawthorn at just the perfect moment, so yeah, Willow S tier, let's go. And Hazel is another fantastic Leafwing. She is what I would imagine and hope most young queens in training are like. I can 100% see in the future when dragons like Glory or Thorn or Ruby have heirs of their own that those heirs are going to be just like Hazel, still a kid at heart, but able to step up when the need arises and lead with wisdom and compassion. A+, if ever I have seen it. And Sequoia, the current queen of sorts. She does a lot of things well, but also has a lot to make up for. If not for her and Hawthorn, the Breath of Evil would probably have died, buried in the jungle, and most of Arc 3 would never have had to happen. She got B+. balanced like her life, I guess. Hawthorn, who originally discovered the Breath of Evil and was eventually banished to try to find a cure for it, ended up at the tippy top of C tier. He seemed like a nice enough dragon when he was himself, but he fell prey to the plant and lost control. Kinda sad, but also you can't say he didn't bring it on himself, as he is the reason the Breath of Evil was rediscovered in the first place, so, you know. Lynx! Hey, yo! We have perhaps the best sidekick-esque character in the entire series. She's good at what she does, and she does it all with a smile on her face. She is perhaps the only dragon in Pyria who could have helped pull Snowfall out of the nosedive she was in, and thank goodness for that. Lynx gets A+, and that's just perfect. Then we have Raven, a human who's pretty sweet and caring. Yes, she does kidnap Dusky, but she really didn't know any better at the time, so she still gets C tier. Some people were very against the prominence that humans were beginning to take on in books 14 and 15. I personally didn't mind, but I think that probably explains a little bit about her and Wasp ended up in the same tier. Back to the dragons then, we have Pineapple, probably my favorite of the forest-raised rainwings. He, of course, has that one hammock scene with Jambu, and it's so cute, I almost died. But he also has a lot of good scenes on his own. He gets pretty far into A tier, and I'm all for that. I'm all for it. And Bullfrog, he ends up in B tier. Underrated. I loved Bullfrog. Sure, he doesn't think very quickly out loud, but I routinely felt like he had an intuitive sense of the world beyond what most other characters ever did. He's the one who brings everyone together when they're arguing on the island, and he's the only one to realize what's happened and react in time when their invisibility spell ends and the human they need to talk to is about to escape. Pretty great if you ask me. He is like a perfect example of a character with really low intelligence but really high wisdom, and he's so fun. I love him. Oh, yeah, and there was one more human. Cottonmouth, D tier, the true main villain of Arc 3. He's a bit of a special case because I think he was built up in a really interesting way and he had a lot of potential, but he was also introduced as the main villain only in the second half of the last book of a 5-book arc. Generally, I would say it's a bad idea to introduce a major character so late in the series. Now, Tui kind of gets around this by spending almost the entire second half of the last book developing him and his backstory, but that also came at the expense of not including a lot of the other really important things that the arc had been building to, so I don't know. I think he could have been great, he just needed to show up earlier, in my opinion anyway. And that brings us to Lizard, renamed Freedom, just barely squeaking into A+. My goodness, if there was one character whose development over the course of a single book could rival Snowfall's, it would be Freedom. She was, I thought, a really, really good depiction of how someone who never got to experience life and instead had to spend thousands of years stuck with Cottonmouth might turn out. And then we got to the end of book 15 and it was sad. But what a fitting end for this character and for this arc. And now, for our final 5 point of view characters, Blue, A+. He was the first point of view character of the arc, which he did pretty well as I thought, and then after book 13, he disappeared almost entirely from the main plot of the arc, which was really sad because I thought he had a lot of potential to add, especially considering the theme of empathy that was going on, but I don't know, he was cool when he was around, so he got A+. And his HiFi girlfriend also gets A+, but on the opposite end. One of the few HiFis who is not a total racist. She was also great, and she actually stuck around the entire time. She is the stereotypical brainiac of the Arc 3 cast, but despite that, she's also sometimes pretty hardcore. I'm mostly glad that her baby tree mentioned in the middle of book 11, which seemed to have no significance at the time, came back at the end of book 15 to make one more appearance. Beautiful. Snowfall, A+. Are all the Arc 3 protags an A+? She is often pointed to as the pinnacle of character development in the Wings of Fire series, and everyone who believes that is absolutely correct. She had some of the most realistic, some of the biggest, and some of the most important character growth of any character in the series, and one of my favorite things about it is that it tied so well into one of the main themes of the arc, the importance of understanding others' perspectives. It was just inspiring to read, but if you want more of my thoughts on that, I did make a video, so you can check that out. And then we have Luna, but she didn't quite make it to A+. Regardless of your feelings about what book 15 was missing, I think most everyone can agree that Luna was one of the strong points within it. Yes, she focuses a bit too much on artwork at times and kind of just rehashes the development that Sundew went through, but it was all a really important setup to establish the baseline for Lizard Freedom's development. Plus, she was so cute with Swordtail. I love them. Alright. It's time for Sundew. Last time she managed to usurp Kibble and claim the #1 spot on the entire tier list. And now, just over 1 year later, with the support and adoration of fan wings across the world, she does not quite reclaim her throne. At the end of the day, she takes the top spot for Arc 3, but falls behind our best Sandy boy remaining in S tier. Her book was, in my opinion, what took Arc 3 from being, okay, all the way to, oh yes, this is the reason I love these books. It was suspenseful, it was funny, it was romantic, it covered some really serious ideas, and at the center of it all, Sundew. Very, very deserved. So that's the Arc 3 characters, and as promised, here's the tier list with every single character combined. Surprisingly, Thorn also surpassed Sundew, taking the #2 spot on the entire tier list. Honestly, last time there was a bit more of a spread between where most characters from the arcs were ending up, but this time it's a pretty well-balanced mix, so whose rating surprised you? Who do you think deserved better, and who deserved worse? Let everyone know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this, and as always, thank you for watching.